Okay, sweet. So I'm gonna go off camera, but I will be here if y'all need any support.
Good afternoon, and welcome. We'll get started in a couple minutes. We have 20 registered, but we just gonna wait a couple minutes to get everyone in here.
Minimize everything.
Okay, well, good afternoon. We're gonna go ahead and get started. We value everyone's time. I want to apologize in advance if you hear some feedback. I am outside at a summit in Michigan, but we're gonna get through this training and yeah, so I'm Marnese Jackson, and I am the Executive Director at the Midwest BDC Decarbonization Coalition. Today's training webinar is going to be on coalition and conflict resolution, which is a great time to, revisit since we are embarking on a new season of advocacy efforts. And so today we will give welcome and introductions, the purpose of the training, tell you a little bit about Midwest BDC. We'll have an icebreaker. We'll do an overview of coalition building. We won't have breakout rooms, but since we're an intimate group today, we'll, of course, allow you all to come off and mute and speak. And then we will go into conflict resolution led by Terry Kush, our operations director, and then we'll get into questions and answers. So we may end before 3 o'clock, but hey, we never know. And so the purpose of this training is to give an overview of what coalition building is and what conflict resolution is, to provide constructive ways on how to navigate conflicts, to provide healthy ways for coalition members can move through conflict in a healthy, productive way, and then to strengthen our movements. Okay, so you can apply this information to any other coalition or network that you're involved in. But yes, we want to offer this for you all who are out here doing the work. So in the next slide, Midwest building decarbonization was started back in 2019 to develop and implement equitable strategies to achieve zero emissions from the Midwestern building sector by 2050. Our priority states are Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa, because the Midwest is the biggest emitter to climate. It's the big emitter of climate emissions between Germany and I believe India. So our footprint is very huge, and so that's why we wanted to make sure that we're doing this in an equitable way. And so in the next slide, we so back in 2019, we developed this theory of change to do building decarbonization in an equitable way by convening stakeholders and allies to do this regional decarbonization strategy. So we do that by way of working in the federal policy space, local codes, alongside environmental and climate justice groups, and technical groups, building science groups, and also Big Greens. And so we now are officially our own nonprofit, and we're the first of a kind to actually do this type of work. So thank you so much for being here. And so in the next slide, this is the Midwest BDC team. I'm the executive director. Jacob Surfling is our director of building policy and projects. Edward Davis is our director of grants and development. Montre Moore is our director of membership engagement. Terry Kush is our director of operations. Joanne Lee is our policy manager. Maggie Heiser is our communications and digital marketing manager. She's working behind the scenes. And then also Dana Gibson is our administrative associate. Okay, so here at Midwest BDC, we honor the HMS principles for democratic organizing, which we do believe is essential to doing coalition building. So 1, be inclusive. 2, there's an emphasis on bottom-up organizing. 3, let people speak for themselves. Work together in solidarity and mutuality. 5, build just relationships among ourselves. And then lastly, a commitment to self-transformation. So, okay, now we still have an intimate group, and that's okay, right? We will offer this training in the future, but when it's time for us to, come off mute, just be open and honest. We want to get your feedback, and of course, we want to improve our coalition building. Step up, step back. Assumptions hurt people, so when we're talking about this work, don't make assumptions. What we're also here to build together. So that means be brave and commit to being uncomfortable when we try to transform this work together. So participation look like, of course, getting you something to eat. It is lunchtime. Interact in the chat. Looking at the slide deck and listening. I know we're at lunchtime and we're probably out here working. So just try to be attentive. We won't get into breakout groups, but when you come off you just be respectful. Use the prompts, to raise your hand prompts, so we can definitely acknowledge you. And then of course, put those questions in the chat. So let's go ahead and get this started. Go ahead and tell us where you are located, where you're from. If you're representing the organization, go ahead and put that in the chat. I see Cheryl Johnson, Cheryl Watson, Dave Schroeder, Lauren Church, Ria Ali, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but welcome and thanks so much for being here. So in the chat, have you ever had conflict resolution training before? So 1, not at all. 3, somewhat. You heard about it. You had to get introduced to it because you were involved in a conflict. 5, completely. All what to do. Terry don't have to do anything or educate us on anything. Put 1, 3, or 5 in the chat. Where you at, so we can give a figure out where you're at on the scale. Okay, I see 3s and okay. Welcome, Ohio in the house. 2, okay. 3, 32, Cheryl. Okay, so 3 and 2, okay. 3. Okay, so we're somewhat in the middle. Okay, so Terry, you know what you got to do. Talk about conflict resolution. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, how about do you understand the purpose of coalition building? 1, not at all. You don't even know why you're here. You just show up. 3, somewhat. Yeah, I get it. I see the purpose, but I'm not quite there yet. But I'm gonna show up though. So I love being around people and I like what you're doing. 5, yes, I know why we're here. I know what my role is. Okay, I see 4s, 4s, and 4s. Okay. 4s, 4s. That's great. 4s are good. Okay. So in the next slide, so here, and I'm gonna definitely, and when we follow up, I'm gonna definitely send you the link to understand your role in the social movement. But we all have roles in this movement, and so whatever movement you're a part of, if you're a part of the Black Power movement, if you're a part of course, the climate justice movement where we're at, if you're a part of any advocacy work, you have a role, okay? And so to get to liberation, we have to understand that we have weavers, experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, builders, caretakers, disruptors, healers, storytellers, guides, and weavers, right? And so we're not going to get too much in that because that's a whole nother training, but I'm definitely going to send you, I want to acknowledge that everybody has a role in the movement. So when you get to coalition building and you have to work with other types of people, understand who you are. That takes the internal part of knowing who you are. And these different roles, whatever they are, whatever you identify with, can change over time, right? So for example, in my I started my activism in junior high. So I was definitely a disruptor. But I have moved on to being an experimenter. I'm definitely a visionary right now, but then also a builder, and you can be more than one at the same time. Okay. So just FYI, this is for your information. When I send you the link out, just study who you are, know who you are, so you can lean better into whatever movement you are a part of. So in the next slide, when we are shaping a coalition, and I'm gonna get into what a coalition is. So remember this slide, okay? Because I'm gonna come back to it. There's 4 different stages when forming a coalition. Is when partners come together. It's been described the honeymoon stages. If you got married before, or if you're married, or if you get into a relationship, everything is rainbows and sunshines, right? Everybody love each other. It's new. This is a big effort. So this is the forming stage. Then sometimes you get into the storm, like you into the work. You getting to know who people are, right? You're showing in the role that you have identified from the last slide. Your personality is coming out. People are starting to have different opinions, and you may not agree. And then you may not all come together on how you're going to do the work, or how you all going to work together. So there's some shifts. So we call that the storm stage, right? Of coalition building. Then I'm going to go to the perform stage and the norm stage. When you get to the storm stage, sometimes you can get to normalizing what your role is, getting through the conflicts that you all have endured during the storm stage. And then you all start to proceed into the performing stage, where you all know what you're doing, you're performing, you're doing what you have to do to achieve that objective of what coalition building is. So in the next slide, thank you, Maggie. So a coalition is a temporary alliance of partnering of groups in order to achieve a common purpose or to engage in joint activity. Coalition building is the process by which parties, individual organizations, or nations come together and they form this coalition. And forming coalitions with other groups with similar values, interests, and goals allows members to combine their resources and become more powerful than when they were alone. So when you build coalitions, it's a basic skill for those who wish to attain power and influence. And through coalitions, the primary mechanism is to make sure that you all are working together. So it's teamwork, right? Unfortunately, that is just also not the case with a lot of coalitions, and also there are when you go through the storm stage, you find the weaknesses, and a lot of those weaknesses can be the downfall of coalitions. So the next slide, some great attributes of being in an effective coalition is coordinating among the partners, clearly articulating the goals, right? Having a strong, flexible leadership, effective and disciplined strategies, swift decision-making mechanisms, and then also effective use of resources, resilience to external events, and ability to identify and engage supporters. And so within the Midwest Building Decarbonization, I will speak for us that we have, of course, been on all different levels from the norm, storm, perform, different stages of the coalition since 2019. And it's good to take a temperature check of where you are so you can make sure that you're doing the work. But I wanted to acknowledge that you have to be flexible when you're building coalitions, especially across a region, right? And things may change. So using these different 8 steps and checking in periodically will be helpful to making sure that your coalition is very effective. And so, when it means to be in a coalition, you have to think about the rainbow method, building relationships with community members and organizations who have the same goal. They may not have the immediate same goal, but it's a part of what the work they do, right? Because if you go by the Jimenez principles for democratic organizing, you're working in solidarity and mutuality. And then ask the community organization what their issues are, their interests, their values are, especially when you're coming into coalition with them. Be objective and definitely be transparent about the democratic structures of the decision making, right? Because we don't perpetuate the harms of the oppressor, right? And we want to honor democratic organizing for those who are involved, right? And with our coalition, we have a multi-layer approach. We have staff, we have board of directors, and we have members, right? So everybody has a role to drive the work to the ultimate goal. And nurture coalition partners, and the coalition itself must be nurtured, right, and sustained, because at the end of the day, climate change is real, and the work that we're doing, seeing the fact that the Midwest, for example, is the biggest emitter of climate change, we have to continue to check in about the work, educate our members, and I wanted to lean in about, taking care of ourselves. So we have to nurture ourselves during this process. Build capacity among members, build alliances, and then also expand the base. Sometimes we have to expand outside the usual coalition member types that I have mentioned from the beginning, right? And then organize. Know the difference between mobilizing and organizing, right? For us, we're definitely organizing, but sometimes we may have to get on the ground and mobilize for some type of direct action if your organization calls for you to do that, right? Every organization can't, for example, if we stay in the climate justice space, can't intervene in a rate case, or don't have a 501c4 status where they can endorse political candidates or do lobbying days. So we have to use the strengths of coalition members who have that power, right? And then win. This is the issue you are already organizing. Create the conditions for winning, right, in the long run. And we know that in this work, it's ever changing. We have to look ahead so our work can be sustainable. Okay. So, and welcome newcomers. I'm outside, so if you hear the bell in the background, I'm at University of Michigan. So, the multi-duties. But did you know, in the next slide, dealings between coalition members are usually harmonious, given that a coalition is an alliance of individuals brought together by a common interest or goal. Controversy and conflict do occasionally develop, however, especially when groups are large and diverse. So conflict is going to happen, and conflict is not necessarily always bad, right? So I know Terry is going to get more into that, but I just wanted to name it. And so in the next slide, oh, here we go again. Did you know? One of the first challenges in building coalitions is to align the goals and agendas of the different groups involved. Each group may have its own vision, mission, values, priorities, and strategies, which may not always match with those of the other groups. And yes, yes, this is the most difficult part of coalition building. Initially, when I came on to staff at Midwest BDC, and you have all types of members from different diverse backgrounds, we used to have these priorities discussions where we will revisit in the future. We know that 2025 is coming up. It's an election year, and it's definitely time to revisit our strategy on how we're going to lean into this work in the future. Regardless of what the political climate is going to be, we have to make sure that our work is sustainable, but things change, right? So this is definitely the most difficult part of coalition building, to get everyone aligned, and it can take months to get the priorities solidified. So I just tell people, when you have priorities discussions, make sure that you're being patient. Okay. Next slide. So with coalitions, you know, we have this substantive and effective conflict. So, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. And intra-organizational conflict. So interpersonal, meaning that some members may come onto a coalition individual who may have their own individual perspective or advancement that they're trying to get done, and may not align with the coalition members or coalition goals. And so immediately there becomes a conflict, or it can be anything simple as a personality type of conflict with another coalition member, or something happened in another space. And sometimes that does get brought into our different coalitions. But then there's intra-organizational and inter-organizational. Intra, that's what's inside the organization. You may have things that's going on internally within your organization that you bring to another coalition, and it sometimes can be personal, but then also it can be that that person is aligned with another organization, or took some money, for example, a utility company, which caused internal conflict, but then they bring it to a bigger coalition, and then it spirals out of control, right? But then there's inter-organizational conflict, or two organizations who have conflict with each other for whatever reason, and they may bring it to a coalition, and eventually people are going to choose sides, right? So that's one of the other downfalls of coalition building. And so in the next slide, within organizational, there's all types of conflicts. And Maggie, can you go back to the other slide? And you all, I want to get some participation going. All y'all may have worked in coalitions, networks, and alliances. I want to know from you, what type of conflicts, it can be internally or organizationally, have you experienced or have heard of? You can either put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and come off mute, and I'm going to get something to drink real quick. Oh, okay. You, Cheryl Johnson, you have seen both. Do you have an example? Would you like to come off of mute?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So we are a coalition, and we do support services for our members. And so we're finding that there are in conflicts within our members that we're trying to support them through. And then we occasionally have conflict between organizations that we're trying to navigate as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so can you say more about it?
Sure. Well, we're like, currently we have an organization that is had to let go of their executive director very rapidly. And we have an interim executive director who is interested in making additional staff changes, trying to support them through that with the understanding that, you know, with a rapid turnover like that of leadership, it's really important to project solid leadership in this time of change, and that additional change may not be a good thing at this time.
Yeah.
And so that is, you know, that's a really difficult, because we don't have any decision-making power, right? That's a difficult position to navigate, and all we can do is try to guide them during this process. And we also have, as part of our support coalition, we've also prioritized worker health, because nonprofit staff are very often overworked, underpaid, you know, all of those things. And so we're centering worker peer support. And we also find ourselves where we may have to help this additional staff that is being let go from our coalition. So it's really kind of messy right now. And I really appreciate the timing of this webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a hard dynamic, especially when you have staff, board, and members. It can be very difficult to navigate and get through. Thanks so much for that, Cheryl. Anybody else before we go on to the next slide? Any other conflicts that you can name in the chat that you may have seen, experienced? Thank you, Cheryl Watson. You wanna, I think Maggie's gonna allow you to speak.
Okay. I
Okay.
think I'm open now. Yeah, something that I've seen a lot of is where you have big organizations, you know, national organizations like Argonne or whatever, that come into communities not having any prior knowledge and not understanding that there are a lot of small groups that are competing for money, and, you know, not.
Oop, Cheryl, you broke up.
Somebody else, it's not me. And so when they come in, they can be disruptive simply because they don't know lay of the land. They don't know the temperature of the community members towards any one particular group. And then there could be someone who's been out operating for the community as a lone advocate because other groups are cliquish, and the lone advocate becomes the target if any attention is given towards them from the larger organization that comes in, because they recognize that there's knowledge there. And so you end up in a cat fight, just why they're not a 501c3, why are you engaging with them, when it's all about the knowledge. It's not about whether you're a 501c3 or not.
Thank you, Cheryl, for that comment, and I appreciate you acknowledging the 501c3 status. Midwest BDC, we just got our status like in February, well, December actually, and I feel like that goes into the whole nonprofit industrial complex. Like, you have to be official to actually do the work. And I'm glad you mentioned the whole funding part of the conversation of how, organizations, not just coalitions, just break down, especially working with other organizations to get funding. So in the next slide, let me see. Here are some examples, and I know there's plenty of more. So you have varying organizational cultures, right? Where, when you come into a coalition, you have different types of cultures, whether they may be on a traditional to a more radical, from traditional, progressive to more radical. it's really hard to like mesh everyone together to actually do the work. And then different stakeholders and different funders. You know, sometimes if you're more on the more justice oriented radical organizations, they won't take money from say like a utility company, versus some organizations in the climate and environmental justice space will. And so I have seen organizations not even want to work with those other organizations because of that fact, right? Overlapping issues, right? It's really hard to get down to one issue because they're all intersectional. So if you have, like, especially in the climate and environmental justice space, it's definitely intersectional, but it's really hard to just lean into one thing. And so I do like the building decarbonizations because it's just focused on homes, but we do know that it's more than just building homes. It's definitely racial, economic, health, right? And so it's just really hard to just really, you know, we don't live single issues lives, and we express that, but it's just really so hard to tell people like, hey, this is going to affect this, and this, and this, and the whole wraparound, but it get lost in the sauce when you're trying to convey that. And then you have different personalities and communication styles, right? People maybe taken back, like if you're coming from a space of I'm more of a passive communicator versus a direct, that's definitely an immediate conflict, and you're not able to just show up in your authentic self if you have different types of communication styles. And then, you know, when the spiraling of conflict continues to happen, you know, it can create more crisis, and you can't like focus on the work, right? And so, you know, we have to go to, you know, the whole conflict resolution part of this, because we're not because if you don't, the work actually won't get done. So I have seen it can be very difficult as a leader of a coalition to do both, keep the work going, acknowledge that there's conflict, and then all these other issues that could have different breakdowns within the coalition. And then lastly, this is one of the biggest ones, turfy politics. And sometimes it could be like even spewed by the funders, right? Like funders sometimes will fund another organization or coalition for the same exact thing. And we're, you know, the purpose of coalitions is to come together to advance something that you couldn't do alone. As an individual organization. So they'll go fund a whole nother organization. Why not just put them within the coalition or the organization that's already doing the work? I don't know how many times I have said to people or funders, well, they're doing that work over there already. Why would you fund, you know, this organization to start over, do it the wrong way, and they're over there doing the work? So then turf starts to happen. So and the next slide, I just want to leave this with Margaret Mead, because it's like, you know, no matter how big or small your coalition is, and if you want to start one, you should never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So I just always think about that when we're doing the work, because, you know, coalitions go through cycles when you have low attendance and you have a peak, and then it just depends, you know, what it is. It's not just one thing. So in the next slide, before I transition over to Terry, there's different phases of team building, and this is not just for coalitions. You could take it back to your church group. You could take it back to your organization, but as I said before, remember that slide, but it didn't have the journey stage, right? Because the goal is for us in nonprofits, if we do it right, we're supposed to be working ourselves out of a job, okay? But unfortunately, we can't because of the climate crisis, and I'm just going to stay with the climate crisis. And we even talk about poverty. People are still in poverty from 30 years ago. So this is a systematic issue. But anyway, going back to the team building. Forming stage, team, acquaint, and establish ground rules, right? That's from the beginning when you're forming your organization. Remember that you're going to go through a storming stage. Communication starts to break down in teams and groups. Sometimes you may experience hostility, people leave, come back, communication styles start to, clash. That's the storming stage. That's where you definitely have to have the mechanisms of conflict resolution in place, right? And have membership code of conduct in place, because it's gonna happen, right? People are people and we're humans. Then going through the norming stage, people will eventually feel like they're part of the team, right? And you also got to bring autonomy to the members or your team, saying, hey, you are a part of this. So you got to make them feel like they're a part of the team. And then eventually you'll get back to the performing, trusting that the trust is rebuilding. You're out here doing the work. You're advancing your organization and the coalition goals, and then adjourning. Eventually, you can do the assessment. I actually think you should do assessments all through these different stages of where you at. And then eventually, your coalition should be transitioning out to either do something else or to just, be done with that coalition. So I'm just going to leave it that there. And I just want to add, for housekeeping, you will get a copy of the slides and the recording. So I'm going to pass it over to Terry. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marnese. Can we just all take a moment to thank Marnese for that very detailed presentation on coalition building. Even things are in there that I always feel like, it's important to keep learning. And sometimes she steps into these meetings and I learn something else. So, okay, so I am going to transition to my slide. I appreciate everyone dropping in their numbers and kind of where you are on the spectrum of understanding conflict and conflict resolution. So let's switch decks really quickly. All right. And I think I need to start looking. Okay, pizza. Okay. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yeah, that looks good, Terry.
Okay, great. Now I'm gonna also ask questions where I would appreciate some responses in the chat as well, but I cannot see them. So I may need your help, Maggie, to just kind of hone in on those. Okay, so yeah, again, we started with talking about coalition building, the significance of it, the importance of it, and recognizing that conflict is real, whether it's in our personal lives, our professional lives, and of course, even in coalitions. What I want to take us through now is, I'm going to go a little bit more into defining conflict, talk about destructive versus constructive, because they're, like Marnese shared, there is good conflict in what we consider to be the kind of conflict that is necessary in order for things to change or evolve. And then, of course, destructive, which I think is what most of us have witnessed when we think about conflict, or at least what we think about conflict is often destructive. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And then talk about what is conflict resolution. I would like us to actually really dig into talking through some strategies, also some tips about things that you can use when you feel yourself in a situation that feels like it's escalating. And then, if we have time, go through a few examples and have a little discussion. And we'll close out with some Q&A. And as Marnese said, we may not go to the full 3 o'clock, I think 3 o'clock Eastern time. So be open to that. I'm sure no one will reject to ending early, but we'll see, because we could have a lot of great conversation. So just appreciate all of you being here. So we're going to jump in. Conflict. Okay, so again, Marnese did an excellent job of kind of taking us through all of that and even giving us an overview of conflict. So some of this will feel like the same sort of thing. And so some of those pieces I'll try to move through a little faster. Conflict comes in many forms, as we've already heard, and can be, broad strokes when you think about how you define that. But it is typically a disagreement in some manner, which can be emotional, physical, personal, or professional, between two or more people. And even even you can have conflict with yourself. So that's just one person, right? We'll touch on that as well. Conflicts in many forms means that it is difficult to generalize, but conflict itself is not inherently bad. Again, same point. A conflict between two people that is ultimately resolved through a process, that's the conflict resolution, that sharpens the thinking of everyone involved is an example of constructive conflict and is a positive representation. Again, what is conflict? This is more just talking about that again and what drives conflict. It can also be a mental struggle, something that you bring with you, which is more of the intra conflict, and results in needing and driving and wishing and demands are those things that influence that particular conflict and causes opposition, or it may not be compatible with your beliefs or feelings or, that have been something that you hold versus what someone else may hold. Conflict which occurs is often a perception or an action. And so I stress that because sometimes the thing that you perceive to be a conflict or someone else perceives to be a conflict is not always shared. And so in order to get resolution on that, that can be even harder, because if I perceive something to be a conflict and you don't, then I don't see the need to engage on resolution, right? So figuring out how to bring those things to the forefront and have those very critical conversations or interventions is very important when you think about conflict. It is a natural part of life, as Marnese has already mentioned, and she also stepped into naming that there are the basic types, which is intrapersonal, and of course, inter and intra-group. I think I skipped one. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Here's my explanation, and this is a little shorter and defined because I didn't want to go too far in that, because she did a really good job of digging into this and helping us understand what the intra versus the interpersonal, as well as intra-group and intergroup. But again, I want to note that there is also conflict that can happen within a person, and that's the intrapersonal conflict. And what that simply means is I have values, and I'm giving you an example. I have values, and an organization I signed up to work with, or a coalition that I signed up to work with, has decided that they no longer do X, Y, and Z, which I hold dear as a value, which is why I joined the coalition. This now becomes an intrapersonal conflict for me that has and I have to decide on how I proceed, whether I stay with the coalition or leave. But this, for me, is just a personal thing, and it is an intrapersonal conflict versus the interpersonal conflict, which is, of course, between two or more people, right? It's just a thing that happens, or people express or feel or experience that can result in an interpersonal conflict. The intra-group conflict, again, Marnese already went through that, so I won't go through that too much here. But I do want to hold it, again, there can be within the organization, which I think I really appreciate the examples that you all shared. Even listening to Cheryl John Cox, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, share the intra and the interpersonal, intra-group and intergroup conflict that they're currently experiencing around the ED leaving and having an interim person, but also the organization or some of the people within the organization wanting to pivot one way while the other group or people within that organization may decide to do a different approach. That sounds like all sorts of conflict. And I can imagine that is very challenging. And hopefully I can bring some of the tools and tips and some of the strategies that you all may want to walk away with and use in these conversations. I see there's a chat. Again, if there's something that someone wants to come off, or Maggie, if there's something that I should take a look at, please let me know.
Yes, that was just a thank you from Cheryl.
Oh, of course. All right, so constructive conflict versus deconstructive conflict. I think this, to me, when you think about it, if you think about constructive and destructive, I think it's self-explanatory. But again, what does that actually mean and how do you hold that? And how do you move from one to the other? Constructive conflict is usually characterized by more adaptive and collaborative behaviors, whilst there may be some difference of opinion. The purpose of this approach is to use calm, effective problem solving and aim for mutually beneficial outcomes. Whereas deconstructive, or I keep saying destructive, I don't know why I want to say that. Destructive conflict can be categorized into two ways. It's basically escalation, taking a situation and escalating it, making it a hostile situation, or there's, angry exchanges. Or there's also the avoidance, which is just like in the middle of the conversation. Someone may actually just get up and walk away and create sort of indirect conflict, right? That avoidance thing is real. I know I've been there, and we'll dip into this a little bit more, but there are so many different ways that we all take in conflict. And it also, of course, naturally depends on the situation, right? And it depends on who the conflict is with, right? Okay, I'm gonna just quickly go through these two, and you can just drop in the chat for me. So based on what we just saw around the definitions of constructive, again, I put deconstructive, ignore that, constructive and destructive. Case scenario one, a leader, and these are both similar situations, but approached differently. Scenario one, a leader begins a working group meeting by emphasizing that you all need to reach a decision. Then a member starts discussing with another member, and the discussion turns into an offensive reunion. The leader begins screaming at the working group members. Then the leader chooses someone from the working group to be in charge of the project, and that no matter what decision they make or take, everyone has to obey, because otherwise they won't be able to meet their deadlines if they don't. Now, would you all consider that constructive or destructive? You can just drop it in the chat. Tell me what you think. Okay. I cannot see. Can you tell me what's there and when can I see it?
We've got a destructive and we've got an agreed.
Agree. Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. And then let's take the same scenario, but with a different approach. So case scenario two, a leader begins a working group meeting. Same situation again. The leader starts the meeting by saying that you have deadlines to meet as a working group, and it's important that everyone reaches a common decision. All of you will have the chance to speak and listen to others. After everyone finishes sharing their opinion, the leader puts all the common points together and the main differences. Everyone can see a broader picture of the problem, and the meeting ends having a greater plan of what to do next for the working group members. What does that feel like to you all? You can actually come off, you don't have to put it in the chat. You can come off it if you'd like, mute, and just let me know what you think. Okay. There, now I can see it. Great. Okay. Any thoughts there? I think it's pretty easy to see that there's actually, this is more constructive conflict, and there's also an approach that this person is taking, which we'll jump into later in this, this webinar, and it's called collaborating approach. So this is the same scenario, but a different approach. It also opens and exposes the conflict or the challenge to being more collaborative, but also making sure that the voice is given to the group to figure out and resolve the issue. Yeah. again, so I just wanted to bring here the breakdown, and what you will see when you see a constructive conflict. Participants talk openly and respectfully. Diversity of opinions. Again, that's exactly what was demonstrated in the second scenario. Collaborative meeting, brainstorming, and productive teamwork. In a different way, of course, destructive conflict, team members point fingers, team is incompatible, or there's incompatibility, unfocused team members, lack of self-control, and unproductive meeting. I'm pretty sure we have all experienced that destructive, but I'm curious to know, has anyone actually experienced the constructive conflict? If a person is doing it right, if you've been in a meeting where it felt like there was a challenge and we worked on it as a group and walked away feeling good about the conversation, some next steps, etc., then you've had a constructive conflict and a meeting that was able to move the needle on that conflict. Has anyone experienced that? Maybe not, but that's okay. We're going to keep moving. All right. Now, if you're in the midst of experiencing a destructive conflict, you want to know how to defuse it. It's like almost like a ticking bomb if it's a really bad one. But you want to be in a place where you know, if you are the person who is in the exchange of a conflict, there are certain things that you should ask yourself to make sure that you are clear about what you are experiencing. 1, 2, if you are making the right assessment. And then 3, trying to understand where you sit within that conflict. So the next time you find yourself in something that feels like it's escalating to a conflict, or you're just walk into or you witness the conflict and you become a part of the conflict, I'd say ask yourself a few questions. Do I feel personally attacked or emotionally affected? Does the person in front of me not really listen to what I say? Are my own words and attitude inappropriate? Because while we are, oftentimes we point the finger back at the thing that was said in the destructive, right? But we all play a role, and sometimes we don't recognize our role. So I think the third question is extremely important. And it's important to think about how you're showing up. What is it that you're bringing to the conversation, and how are you bringing it to the conversation? So ask yourself, are my own words and attitude inappropriate? If your answer to any of these questions is yes, chances are most likely you are in the midst of a destructive conflict. And step back and refocus on the goal of your discussion. So if you had an overarching goal or you had an agenda and you were trying to have a conversation around that, it's always best to step back and try to refocus on the goal of the discussion in the moment. Becoming aware of destructive tendencies is the first step to breaking bad habits. So even practicing something like this is a good way to start to change the behavior, acknowledge the behavior and change the behavior so that you become aware of when you're starting to slide down that road, and or your person that you're engaging with is starting to slide down that road. You can also ask the person too, hey, is there something that I said that feels inappropriate, or am I not communicating effectively enough? What is it that you are confused about? I mean, just engaging that person to help de-escalate, because oftentimes what it is that people feel like they're not being heard, which causes them to be frustrated, which causes them to escalate to a point of, sometimes of no return and just want to argue, or a variety of responses. So now we're going to I started there kind of starting to talk about conflict, because that was more about how do you de-escalate? Because I think it's important to just center on that, because oftentimes we don't remember all of the strategies and the tips in the moment. but it feels easier to think about what is the thing I can do now to help me de-escalate a situation. So that was kind of what that was focused on. And again, Marnese, as Marnese shared, you're going to get these slides. But I want to talk more about the process of conflict resolution. What does that mean? What does that look like? How do we make sure that these conversations are relevant to the issue at hand, but also engaging for both parties who are experiencing the conflict? And by all means, if you find yourself needing to ask me a question as I go along, please, please, please put those in the chat and or raise your hand so that Maggie can let me know that they're there, and I can try to jump in and take your questions. Okay. All right. Conflict resolution. This is the informal or formal process that two or more parties use to find a peaceful solution to their dispute. Now, I put peaceful because, of course, you know, we would all like these sorts of things to be peaceful. And that's not always the case, right? But ultimately, in a perfect world, it would be a peaceful solution. There was a hand raised.
There is, yes. It looks like Mary Alice has a question. And Mary
okay.
Alice, you should be able to come off mute now.
Yeah, please do.
I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. But hello, everyone. And, you know, being involved in government for as long as I have been, and just coming out of it, conflict has always been a problem. But I myself am very optimistic person. And I,
Mhm.
you know, I do things and I just expect the best outcome. And if that outcome doesn't work, then I just take another avenue. And the same thing with conversations. When we have a disagreement amongst ourselves, I try to, you know, get the mayor and the rest of my colleagues to see my point of view when it comes to, well, this will create our tax base, it will create jobs. And, you know, conflict, it just happens. But when other people interject to make things worse and blown out of hand, it's time to change the narrative of the whole conversation. And it seems like it's worked in times past. So, you know, give people a different aspect of looking at things.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mary Alice, that example. Any others? Anyone else have any comments or questions that they would like to share here? Okay. Yeah, we're actually going to touch on that, Mary Alice, in further down in the slides. And I think that's, again, an excellent example. I also want to note here, a number of common cognitive and emotional traps can happen. And I think even your example named some of those, Mary Alice, many of them unconscious. Sometimes it can exacerbate the conflict and contribute to the need for the conflict resolution, right? Like even the example where I think I appreciate you even named in the comments that individuals seeking the rewards and I'm paraphrasing what you put there, but oftentimes people will step into conflict with no other purpose other than to reap all of the rewards and not put in the work. And that's a real thing. And I'm sure you experience that in government, but I think through most, it is actually human nature to want to win. Whatever that means in a conflict is usually determined by that individual. But oftentimes what we need to do is take into consideration all the parties that are involved in the conflict. So yeah, thank you, Mary Alice. What makes conflict resolution go well? They include clear communication. And that can be in a variety of forms, but I think just being explicit about the purpose of the conversation, for example, or a meeting or a project, being very clear about what I like to use is called POP, purpose, outcomes, and process. If you can create opportunities for people to understand ahead of time, during, and after the meeting, what the expectations are around the conversation and or the project, and or the goal, all of those things, you will find you may have less conflict. It doesn't mean that conflict's not going to happen. Again, we know it's still a part of everyday life, right? But clear communication can help to get rid of that. And it can also create opportunities for more engagement. I'm going to get through this and I'll go to the chat in a minute. Feedback is given and received. So when you're communicating in the midst of your conflict, or you see a conflict about to arise, being clear about what it is that you are hearing, like, hey, I am giving the feedback that this happened, but also be open to receiving feedback from the person that you are in conflict with. Feedback is not an easy thing for any of us to do for whatever reason. It is also like many things that these skill sets, it is something that has to be practiced and learned so that you can get better. One place that does a good job of training around that is the Management Center. So I would recommend people consider that, but there's other opportunities to beef up that skill as well. But feedback is really important. So it's back to the whole piece of listening, being present in the conversation. Willingness to seek compromise. We'll come back to that too and talk a little bit more in detail about that. But whenever there's conflict, I think, you know, back to the, oh, sorry, I want to go back. Okay. The piece that Mary Alice shared about individuals seeking the rewards, like their focus becomes the reward on the other end, not necessarily interested in and the parties involved, the purpose of all of that, but willing to understand that there is compromise required in order for conflict resolution to be successful. And then developing the skill. If you have developed a skill, and it takes practice. So again, you will continue to find yourself, you know, when I say it goes well, the first time it may not go well. But at that moment, guess what you're doing? You're developing your skills, and you'll find yourself getting better at articulating what it is that you need, and also understanding and getting that feedback of what the other person needs and how you can come to some sort of common ground. And I'm going to go now to, to the chat, because I see there's a few things in there. Okay. Oh, Pop. Okay. So Pop, I think I just, yes, purpose, outcome, and process. Yes, thank you, Cheryl John Cutts. Yes, it is a practice that many use to help get to the crux of whatever the issue is, and or the conversation, and or the project. So people are prepared and understand, first and foremost, this is what we're doing and why. Again, it goes back to the issue that I shared above, which is how do you de-escalate conflict? You try to go back to the purpose and recenter people's attention around that so that you don't go too far off of the purpose. Oh, previous slide. Which slide is that, Linda? Sorry. Linda, can you come off mute or just tell me?
It was green and white.
Oh, I haven't. We're gonna get to that one next.
Oh, okay. I saw it quickly and then it went away.
Yeah, it was the next one. I hit the button a little too fast.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So perfect timing. So conflict styles. There's a model that was created by Thomas Kilman. And again, there's all types of conflict, but we all approach it differently. There is the competing conflict, which is back again to the example Mary Alice gave, which is people who view interpersonal conflict resolution as a win-loss game. And so they're rather caught up in like, what can I get out of this? And what is the value to them? Avoiding. Now, this is more, I find myself often doing this, but I'm moving towards collaborating. People with the avoidant conflict style prefer to skirt around conflict because it can be uncomfortable, and an effective short-term coping strategy. It's only effective in that moment, but it does nothing to solve the issue, right? Because when you turn around and go back the next day, the conflict is still there, or could potentially still be there. And the reason why before I go to the next three, the reason why I'm lifting up the conflict styles is because this is often what you will find. It's two things. One, that in the moment, you may take any one of these approaches or two approaches at the same time. And then two, it is also, if you are existing within that particular type of conflict, you will find that your resolution to the conflict is also moving in that same sphere. So I'll give you an example. In the avoiding conflict, you will, like I said, you could be in a conversation and you walk away. But the other part of that is your resolution to it is pretty much null and void. Even if you go back to it, you're still in the avoidant frame of mind. And so your resolution is not going to be effective because all you're thinking about is what can I do or not do to have to deal with this issue? Does that make sense? Accommodating. These people tend to put others' needs and demands first and seems agreeable and easygoing, but ignore their own needs. And this, I think, oftentimes we find a lot of people are this way because they want to just everybody to get along. And that can actually be quite a disservice, not only to yourself, but to the person that you're in conflict. Because how are you going to grow and how are you going to get better at managing conflict, as well as how are you going to get to a resolution to move forward? And then compromising. People with a compromising style often try to resolve conflict by proposing seemingly equal choices, meaning like, hey, let's just meet in the middle. And that can work, but there's also downfalls to that, right? Because meeting in the middle may not even actually solve the issue. The issue could still be there because oftentimes what we find, oh, sorry, if you all heard the background, my windows are open. So I apologize if you heard the horn outside. But what we find is that if we're not getting to the root cause of the conflict will resurface. And so no matter how much you compromise, you still haven't gotten to the root of the problem. So that's an issue. And then finally, collaborating. People who aim to understand the deeper needs behind demands are willing to express their own needs, which is key. But they also value the work of and the collaboration, emotions, and trade-offs of their colleagues. And so they take all of those things into consideration in order to get to a resolution. And collaborating is often the approach that we should take when we're thinking about conflict. Now, again, if you remember, I named that while there are different types of conflict styles, we will use these in different ways. And so while I may think, oh yeah, I want to really get to collaborating, it's actually okay to sometimes say to a child, for example, you have a fussy, I don't know, 5-year-old, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to give you some ice cream this time because I don't want to deal with this anymore. But the person has received something and you in turn get to receive the quiet. So in that moment, you've decided to use compromising. And another time you may find as they get older, no, we're not doing that. We're going to collaborate. Or you just decide, actually, no, I want to do competing because I am the parent and you're going to do what I say. And the reward is strictly for me. So again, we may find ourselves in different scenarios and in different times in our lives or stages with different conversations that we may need to pull on a variety of these. And it may not just be one in that moment. Does that make sense? Any questions? Comments? Oh, sorry. Okay. I will keep moving. Oh, okay, great. Yeah. And I'm curious too, while I'm trying to access the chat, I'm curious if when you think about how you approach conflict, if you can drop in the chat which one you find yourself doing most often, that would be super. I'm really curious to hear from you all. What is the one that you find yourself doing most often? And there's no right or wrong answers. Don't be ashamed if you're always strictly avoiding. It's okay. Or if you're the one who's always compromising. All of these are legitimate ways and approaches. Some of them, just depending on the scenario, are better in particular situations. So yeah, if you can, drop in the chat. Where do you often find your conflict style? Yeah. Competing. Yeah, I hear you, Sheila. Cheryl, accommodating. All depending on the conflict. Of course, no, that's totally right. Yes, that's right, Marnese. Compromising, Linda. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, I would say yes, I'm in total agreement with Marnese about depending on the situation, but I will say I am a reformer and I am totally moving from avoidance. Like I'm really trying to not be that anymore and moving more towards collaborating. Yeah. Thank you, Cheryl. This is great. Thank you. Okay. Fantastic. All right. So now let's talk about a few strategies. How am I doing on timing, Marnese? Okay.
We got 2:38.
Okay, great. All right, strategies. Conflict resolution strategies. Now, you want to keep in mind all the things we just talked about around type, because those things are real, right? But then there's also strategies we want to think about when we approach conflict resolution. There's a strategy one, recognize that all of us have bias, fairness, perception. What does that mean? Bias, fairness, perception. Any idea? Well, I'm just going to tell. We all show up, as we know, with our own biases. As much as we think we don't have any, we all do. And so recognize that. And when you step into a situation, you find yourself saying, oh, well, this person doesn't like me because I'm this or that. This is the way that I perceive things all the time, so it must be right. So taking a hold of that and sitting with that and recognizing that that's real. And then strategy two, avoid escalating tensions with threats and provocative moves. I think this is an obvious strategy. And of course, back to the point that I was making before is that we don't want to be in a destructive conflict. And so therefore, what is it that we can do to de-escalate them? But also just thinking about how are we showing up and what are the words we're using and how we are engaging in the conversation. So being conscious and aware of that and not using words that are threatening or posture or intimidating behavior. Strategy number three, overcome an us versus them mentality. And this is particularly something that you will find in group dynamics. You want to make sure that when you are naming or you are experiencing a conflict in a moment, and maybe it's actually just between you and that individual, or you and maybe two other people, or you and a group. But in that moment, it's you with those two other people. It is not you representing everyone, even though you may feel like you are. In that moment, you are in conflict with that person or those people. And so just recognize it's, us versus them mentality doesn't always serve you, and being clear about what it is you need in that moment and listening to the feedback that you're getting and open to the compromise. I'm sorry, I see that Cheryl, do you want to come off mute and talk about what's coming up for you? Cheryl John Cox, I'm sorry. Yes.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Is my hand raised or
Oh,
something?
no, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong one. Mary Alice, sorry about that. Mary Alice, do you want to come off?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is a dilemma that I have. And it's an actual dilemma because after being involved since 2002 in government as a Brownfield Authority board member and then serving 3 terms as an elected official, speaking and having a voice for the people, and being a licensed professional cosmetologist, doing a lot of these people hair over the year and listening to their ills and their wishes and wants and desires of what they want in their community. Okay, now the elected officials always being accused and pointed the finger at for not being transparent, not being, accountable for others coming in and doing different things. Okay, that very thing is going on.
Mhm.
And I'm watching it play out, and I'm the only one at the table instead of the elected officials putting this group together, putting together an advisory group so that the community and everybody else knows that it's all inclusive, because these people are taking the reins and doing their own thing, putting other things, giving other things priority over what the people actually want.
Yeah, and when I say us versus them mentality, I don't mean you can't go and speak for a group. Like if you're part of a coalition or a group of people who within a community who's decided that they want to come together and voice, these 5 things in their community, and you are the person chosen to represent them, that makes sense. I think what I'm honing in on is the us versus them, as in, you haven't had those conversations and you just decided, oh no, I'm speaking for everybody. That can be very dangerous for a lot of reasons, right? You have to be careful in how you're approaching that. And you have to be clear, like in that moment, if someone says something to you that's antagonistic to you, about you, then it's no longer us versus them. It's you and that person exchanging a conflict. Do you get what I'm saying? It sounded like I was expressing you can't go and speak to people on someone else's behalf. That wasn't really what I was saying, but I do think that it's important to name those and understand the difference. Does that make sense? I don't hear everywhere I go. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, sorry. And strategy number 4, look beneath the surface to identify deeper issues. Remember, I talked about the root causes. There are oftentimes people will come into a situation, and again, we're bringing the bias, fairness perceptions with us. And we're also bringing our own sort of lived experiences, right? And sometimes those things show up in ways that may not answer to the crux of the issue. And it is really helpful in those moments if you can get to the crux of the issue or the root of the cause. And that is a little harder, but it is a good strategy, because when you have taken the time to put in that work, the person on the other side will feel heard, appreciate that you've taken that time, and most likely will try to show up differently. Okay, there's another hand. It looks like Carlton, you want to come off mute and talk? Is that right? Carlton had a hand up. Where did I see that? Am I mentioning? Yeah, Carlton.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, quick question. When you are representing a coalition and you get noted for representing a coalition, and then you start speaking to a group, where do you divide the line between personal, what you're saying personal, and when you're speaking for a coalition or a group? So that it does not become personal, or they think that you're speaking for the group. How do you actually manage that when you're speaking?
One of the things that and I think and Marnese can also jump in on this part. One of the things that I have found helpful is when you are talking about, for example, you have been given, like I said, you've been given 5 directives of things that your group or coalition may ask you to bring to the state legislation. And in that, you've covered maybe 3 of them. And then you say, oh, but I've experienced blah, 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 blah. So in that moment, you are taking yourself, not necessarily saying you're not a part of the group, but you're acknowledging, I'm talking now about the things that I want to bring to the table. You have to specify I. When you are speaking as the group, you say, okay, now back to the issues that the group wants to raise, 4, 5, and 6. Does that make sense? Because what you don't want to do is cite something that is truly just your individual experience and or opinion, and it's misinterpreted as the group opinion and or experience. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. It's just how people receive it. Sometimes it's
I
a
know.
different. It's a little, you might clearly say, I personally have this, but they usually will perceive it as being, okay, you speaking for the group.
So what I would say is oftentimes it's best to go through whatever the things are that were outlined for the group, like, hey, again, I keep referring back to this example, but if the group says, here are the 5 things we want you to raise, you go through the 5 things for the group first and try not to, although the example I gave was not, I interjected in between. It is actually best to list out the things that are the group priorities or the pieces, the topics that they want you to cover. And when you're done, you acknowledge it and say, I'm finished giving the report out from the group, and I just want to share with you my own personal experiences. And then you name them. So it allows you to, again, to delineate the two. But you're right, still, you can't help what people hear, right? Or the way they interpret it. But at least you've done your part to communicate back to the point clearly, right?
Yeah. Try to separate it, at least on your part, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Terry, and I just want to add, I when I was at the NAACP, I was also representing for Michigan Environmental Justice Coalition, and then I had myself in the mix and all these other organizations that I represent. I always, like Terry said, did the organizational stuff first. I will always lead with the organizational, whatever we were doing, whatever the acts was, whatever stance it was first, okay, because I'm representing all these different entities, right? And I would say, hey, I'm representing A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But then at the end, I would say, I, Marnese Jackson, for the record, okay? For the record, okay? You may have to just say that, or for the record, MEJC, or whatever organization you're part of, for the record, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
excellent point. Thank you, Marnese. Yeah, yes. I co-sign that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the final thing that I just want to share here for the last strategy, separate sacred. Now, I'm going to ask questions about this, but separate the sacred from pseudo-sacred issues. And what I mean by that is one person may value family. That is a real sacred thing for a person. A pseudo-sacred thing maybe, actually, all of my family feels that we have to go to Martha's Vineyard every August, or not, I won't say that. I have to have my cat go only to this particular vet, and it's like sacred to me because that's really important that they only go to this particular vet. Well, that's not really sacred. That's pseudo-sacred, and it's not something that's going to damage whatever the situation is, because you can always go to a new vet. It may be sacred to you, but it's not going to cause any harm if the cat potentially goes to another vet. But spending time with your family, that can't be replaced. Do you see what I'm saying? That is a real sacred thing. Does that make sense to people, what I'm talking about here? So just naming those things and acknowledging them within you when you show up to a meeting or to a coalition and you're like, oh, but I have to do this, and this should be a part of our march forward, when in fact it really isn't. It's something that you hold dear, but it's not really something that a coalition may hold dear. This is essentially what I'm getting at here. Oh gosh, we're like, okay, let me quickly move through the next few. All right, and then so we're almost at the end. But I also want to just name within our own organization the way that we are trying to own up to not only talking about conflict resolution, but also making sure we put in place certain practices and tools for the coalition to use to move through conflict. And the first and foremost thing, if you haven't gotten by now, one of the things that I think is most important is the communication, and also making sure that when you're in, if you can, okay, all of these things are, depending on the situation, right? Because you may find yourself in a situation that's so escalated, you can't actually stop and take a deep breath. You have to figure out in that moment how to de-escalate. But if you're in a situation where you can actually, you know what, I'm going to take a moment, particularly in these virtual spaces in which we work, it feels even harder to communicate. And it's hard to judge based on just a Slack message or an email or a text, or even in that moment in Zoom, right? Sometimes it takes that you should take that opportunity to de-escalate for yourself, meaning you step back and you practice mindfulness, just sitting with it, acknowledging what you're feeling, and knowing it's okay to feel uncomfortable, and sit with that uncomfort. And know that you can change the situation to the best of your ability. Do deep breathing, and make sure that you are allowing yourself the time to process. Second, we encourage people to talk to each other, and of course, again, back to the feedback piece. It is always important to start with, if you can, again, taking the lead on trying to address the conflict with the person directly, or within the group directly, if you can, and offer feedback on what you experienced or what a person said. But again, be willing to accept that. And making sure that sometimes people are unaware, and oftentimes you yourself, again, like I said, need to process what has just happened. If addressing the experience feels outside your level of comfort, seek support from a fellow member to talk through what you've experienced or witnessed, and seek to come away from the conversation with a plan of action and some next steps. Because what we often do is sit and complain. I discourage that. Complain 5 minutes. Think about how you're going to be solution oriented. What does that mean? What is it that I need to help me adjust and heal from what I just experienced? What is it that I need to make sure that I can continue to have my this relationship with my colleague? What is it that I need to make sure that this member and I can engage again? And what are the steps I'm going to take on my side? Because you can't tell someone else how to be, right? And you cannot expect someone to respond the same way you respond. But what you can do is try to do your best to show up in a situation, to be open to what you've experienced and have a discussion around it. But this type of conflict, depending on the conflict again, can require some mediation and support. And so within our organization, we have a complaint process that people can go through, and they can file that with our membership working group. And the membership working group uses the guidelines created by our membership guide and code of conduct to then process that and go through a set of steps to follow up with both members and figure out a way to bring them together to work through the conflict, so that there's someone there to serve as a third party to help the conversation move along. I think, are there any questions there? Okay. Now I'm just going to give you a few more tips, and then I think I'm done. Well, no, I'm not. There was a practice, but we don't have time. So, conflict resolution tips. Again, some of these things you already heard. Demonstrate and give grace. Again, people sometimes don't know how they're showing up. People are experiencing real challenges in their day-to-day lives. We're in the midst of a crazy election campaign cycle, all of the things. So just, demonstrate and give grace. Listen to learn. Again, back to the feedback piece. As someone is sharing with you all the things that are going on with them, or how they're feeling, or whatever they're experiencing in that moment, listen to learn. It may be hard to hear, but we're adults and we got to start learning how to exchange and have difficult conversations. It is also important, sorry, I have a question. Oh, okay, Cheryl, let me just finish this last, okay, I'll let you ask this question because I know, go ahead. We don't have much time. So yes, ask your question. Oops. Hello? Do you want to come off mute?
Okay.
Okay.
My mute was not there.
We got you now. Thank you.
So on that last section you were talking about, I had an experience recently coming into a different coalition. Some of them have worked with me for a while, so they respect me. So I'm being jumped in to be like on the steering committee because of the subject matter. I'm the one in the room who knows everything, because I know it. And so they have faith in me. And someone came from the outside who had previously tried to lure me to her organization, I think, but she wasn't, bold enough to just say it. But I had a strong vibe about her over the years because she was always mansplaining me. Like, I don't know what I'm saying. She's translating for everybody else when really she's not comprehending. And so she came in with a fury because she wasn't in any of the other meetings. And her comment was about the fact that they were putting me on the ballot for the steering committee because I'm an individual with the LLC, not just a community person. Well, I started out as a community person, building all this knowledge and everything, and then I realized my bills were not being paid, so I became a LLC. And she kept talking, trying to explain me to myself. And so we were near the meeting, and so everybody else was stunned. So I just said, I think this is the time for the meeting to end. And everybody else, like, they got off real quick, leave, leave, leave. She came in there because what I was feeling before was actually true. She wanted me to come work with her a long time ago. I'm coming into this coalition where we all know each other. And I was shocked that she flew in and dropped that bomb like that. And she doesn't know me. She tries to treat me like a little girl when I'm the oldest person in the room, okay? So I felt very strongly that I had to show rank in a way because I've always been, laid back, let them talk. Because they're younger, they got to sort it out. I don't want to come in with the answer. I know the answer, but I don't want to come in with the answer. So people were kind of stunned because they had never seen me like put a stake in the ground like that. But I felt better because she had been mansplaining me for about 3 years here, every meeting, whenever she's shown up, but she's gotten a leadership, she's gotten a manager job somewhere else. They would not hire me because of alliance with someone else. She comes in and she seems like she's upset that I'm going into this other coalition and not coming in there and working for free. So I felt good about it, but just listening to you talk about that, would that be considered overkill or what?
Overkill from whose part? I mean, at the end of the day, you probably should have just pulled her to the side and had a conversation. But like I said, sometimes these things are happening in the moment. You did an avoidant conflict situation, which is okay, because again, in the moment, sometimes it's necessary. But what probably should have happened is just to follow up with that person, that individual, to say, what is going on? Why are you, just ask questions. And to get back to my point about getting at the root cause. Sometimes, however, you may find, like you said, you end up going separate ways, it sounds like. Sometimes that's all it is, and you don't really need to spend any more time in it. You know what I mean? And it's okay.
Well, I tried the kinder, gentler, but she came into that meeting with goal. She had read our documents and she was furious and she couldn't control herself, and it shocked me, it shocked everyone. And I tried to just, quietly deal with it, but then she elevated her voice and the statement about me being that I have a business. What does that have to do with being on a steering committee when they wanted me there because of my knowledge?
Well, then I get you. So Cheryl, I appreciate that. And I know now we're at top of the hour. So
I know.
But I appreciate your sharing your story. And then I'm just going to say really quickly, build a golden bridge. And that's basically, it comes from Harvard's program on negotiation, which is basically figure out what that person needs and create a bridge to that person using what you know that could be helpful in bridging the gap in the conversation. I love the build a golden bridge. There's more I would have liked to talk about there, but try to foresee challenges beforehand. And of course, as I said before, aim to get at the root cause of the conflict and try to see the other person's perspective. There was another example, but I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. And again, you all will get copies of this. It's always lots of information. I appreciate all of you and thank you for engaging with us in so many levels in today. Marnese?
Yes, I did not know it was going to go over, but we got to go because someone needs to Zoom online. But of course, you get the slide deck, you get the recording, you get all the information. And now, Terry, we know we need a part 2. So thank you all for being here, staying here, and asking all these wonderful questions. And we'll take them back and use them. So have a wonderful day, and we'll see you all in the next Zoom room.